Good afternoon. We're back here with another market update for MKC and Mid-West Fertilizer. I'm Troy Walker, Director of Crop Nutrients. I have Devin Schierling, VP of Sales for Midwest Fertilizer and MKC, and also Scott Barkley, VP of Energy for Midwest Fertilizer and MKC. Few interesting things to talk about today. Some current events going on with Russia and Ukraine, and also this hurricane over here. Let's start it there. We were talking just a minute ago specifically about the transportation issues that we're seeing, and as that reflects on energy, fertilizer, and grain. Most specifically, what impacts could we anticipate from the Florida hurricane?
Yeah, and Troy, when we look at the changes from the transportation standpoint, luckily where this hurricane is moving isn't dramatically impacting our ability to export or import grain, but the overarching weather patterns are starting to have some long-lasting effects. When we look at some of the giraffe, you said giraffes a little bit ago, Troy, and we're not at a zoo here, but it feels like we are.
Oh, sure.
So when we look at this, the ability to move more grain down the barges to hit the export channels has been a challenge from that standpoint.
Yeah, we're seeing. I was telling Devin on the fertilizer side, we're talking to truckers and logistics, and one of our major pull points is out of Inola, the Tulsa area, and we're not being able to find back hauls for that fertilizer coming out of there. Every trucker we talk to says there's just no grain headed that direction. You want to elaborate on that just a little, Devin?
Yeah, so historically, Kansas has been has been an exporter of corn. So all of our corn, we've grown more than we use domestically. So we've shipped that out either by rail at the beginning of harvest or to our neighboring states. Well, this year with the drought issues that we have, lack of production, we're actually importing corn into the state. So instead of us using all of our local trucks to move product out of the state, we're railing stuff in to fill those needs. And so it's really impacting how things change. And we look at how that's going to look the next couple of weeks. So we have a Milo harvest that's getting ready to come out. Historically, that the last couple of years, that Milo has went on steel wheels to the Gulf and then went over to China to fill that need. As we look forward this year, we have lack of corn, so that feed grain is going to stay home, either in domestic ethanol or into our livestock market. So it's changing freight patterns and flows. And I know that we were talking about our usage of trucks and how 2 weeks ago or a month, we couldn't find enough trucks. Now we have trucks calling us. And so it just changes and increases that volatility at all levels. We talk about weather volatility, we talk about logistics and supply chain, and then I think it's a natural key over to the energy side.
Yeah, going back to your question earlier, Troy, about the impacts of Hurricane Ian on the markets that we are involved in, from a crude supply, production, and therefore refinery supply and production standpoint, Hurricane Ian isn't going to have a direct impact because it's not going to get far enough into the Gulf to shut down those productions or the refineries there in the energy corridor of the Gulf closer to Louisiana and Texas. However, there is an interesting impact that happens with these hurricanes that hit the East Coast and Florida. Initially, there is a demand increase as a lot of folks exit an area. And then there is a bearish demand decrease as the aftermath of this hurricane will be felt, followed by a bullish demand increase with the construction that will happen post a large natural disaster like this one is anticipating will happen. So that in context with the inventories that just came out, we've got, again, continued domestic supply of diesel fuel below 5-year average. And one of the things that's really interesting that I'm seeing is that the refinery utilization in the United States is down now to 90%. That's impactful because refinery cracks are actually really high. So if refiners had the ability to run at capacity, they would be. We're seeing a lot of unplanned maintenance. There was a fire, an explosion in Toledo, Ohio last week, which unfortunately killed a couple of people, but also impacted the supply of gasoline throughout the United States. So kind of trying to wrap that all up, we are seeing some pretty big forces moving demand and supply of gasoline and diesel around, knowing that we're already at low inventories. That's going to be some pressure to the upside in the energy markets.
And that's a great segue into what we're actually seeing here locally, because we talked about all the things that were limiting the supply of grain to all of our end users. But at the same token, we look at what are the crush margins at the ethanol plants and how that's impacting. And we're starting to see how lack of demand, as well as their overall increasing cost to produce, is creating negative margins and then decreasing their run. So that'll be something we need to keep our eyes on here in the next couple of weeks as to what our local demand looks like and how that changes going forward. So Troy, as we look into wheat, we were driving home last night and we're probably 0 to 5% drilled throughout the territory on wheat. What are we seeing from an initial fertilizer pull?
Yeah, I would say it was really just this week that we started, I could tell from my chair that we really got serious about doing a lot of wheat planting and putting it in the ground. Orders for phosphates, whether that be liquid or dry, certainly picked up dramatically this week. So I can tell that the growers are getting started with that. Typically that takes us about 2 to 3 weeks. What I'm hearing, the conversations were had before we ever got started, and I would say they're playing out, best I can tell, is a lot of the nitrogen. The growers are either going to reduce dramatically how much nitrogen they put on up front, or they're gonna punt that entirely, which is totally viable as an option for wheat, where you can come back in later and top dress and be perfectly fine.
Troy, you mentioned when we first started this that there was some current events with Russia and Ukraine. Can you want to go into what we're hearing happen with that pipeline and how that might impact fertilizer prices as well?
Yeah, it's really more of the same conversation. I would say, the initial response yesterday from the European natural gas, it didn't really do anything yesterday, but my understanding is today it ran up pretty significantly after hearing, which we would anticipate, right? We would expect if you're going to shut down another pipeline, another supply link for, at this point in time, an unknown period of time, as we were talking about, Scott. I mean, this isn't just the water line in your backyard that you can call up the local plumber and fix it with some Flex Seal. This is pretty major to get this thing back online. That's going to keep the prices of natural gas in Europe elevated. We've been looking for natural gas the theory in the fertilizer market was natural gas in Europe needed to be below $50 per MMBTU and probably closer to $40 per MMBTU for production to really start back up and be sustained. It kind of got to that $50 range, but now if it's going to go back up, and the other thing is it can't just pop down. You got to be able to know that, hey, I'm going to be able to afford the fertilizer, or the natural gas, the feedstock to produce the fertilizer for more than a day. That you've got to have consistent supply for enough time to make it worthwhile to bring that plant up, to keep it running, and keep it going.
Yeah, and what I find interesting, and people might not naturally understand, that the price of natural gas can impact the price of diesel in Kansas. And the reason that is because natural gas is used as a heating source in Europe. If natural gas is not available, a secondary heating source would be heating oil, which is diesel fuel. The demand for diesel fuel in Europe this winter should increase because of this pipeline outage, meaning that the price for diesel fuel in the United States and in Kansas and for our member owners, again, would have some pressure to the upside with that natural gas impact.
Yeah, so as we look here going forward over the, really between now and the end of the year, even without this interruption in the Nord Stream pipeline that we saw, it was looking a little bleak for nitrogen, particularly anhydrous and UAN, as there's a really strong European market. We perceive now that European market and the strength of that market will hold out here for the next several months. So as far as nitrogen goes here to the rest of the year, I mean, I'm pretty firm to up as far as, you know, I'm not anticipating a lot of decreases in that, again, unless something really major happens. Phosphate, you know, back to the very beginning question on the hurricane, you know, most of the domestic phosphate is produced out of Florida. So we could see some interruption there. I mean, it's a mine, so even if it's not damaged, like we saw a couple years ago when that hurricane hit Louisiana, the hurricane itself didn't destroy or really impact the production that much, but 3 weeks without power took a toll on the market. So we could see that coming in phosphates, but barring that, I mean, phosphates have been pretty flat and don't see a lot of change there. And the only other thing out of Russia is we're seeing that there's a lot more potash coming to the global market that's not coming out of Canada. So we're actually, the potash market is pretty full on supply right now, creating some softer prices. Devin?
Yeah, and sticking on that European theme, you know, we've seen the European wheat futures rise dramatically, and that's also created that volatility that we've seen here in the U.S., trading really a 50, 60 cent trading range, but seeing big moves over the course of a period. And so between that volatility and then the uncertainty, we just look for this wheat market, continue to look for direction, and be just really in a push-pull environment when it comes to what news is out there. So whether it's the Russian farmer being drafted into the military, or you know, or just the lack of bushels being able to hit the world market,
or the strength of the dollar being at a 20-year high. That certainly is impactful to the market. All of us.
Yeah,
it impacts all of us. Yeah.
It completely decreases, you know, the overall market for our crops here when we're so much more expensive than the rest of the world. So keep your eyes on that 23, 24 opportunities when it comes to the wheat market, most definitely.
Yeah. You know, so I appreciate everybody tuning in. To wrap it up today, you know, like we're always saying, if you have more questions or need anything else, please reach out to your MKC and Mid-West Fertilizer staff, and we'll certainly answer your questions or help you best we can. Look for those opportunities. I mean, there's going to be buying opportunities, there's selling opportunities. Do those things. Make sure you understand your cost of production, what it means for your farm specifically, and take advantage of those opportunities when they're out there. So appreciate everybody tuning in, and we'll look forward to chatting with you again next time.